Today, we're going to launch off into the thing everybody wants to talk about, rejection. See, all of us deal with it. But we're going to deal with it from realizing in this whole theme over probably about the next 3 weeks about rejection, because it's attached to pain. But it too can lead us to our purpose, realizing who we are, not in the world, but who we are in Christ. How many of you know the world is going to mess up your life continually? That's what it always does. We keep chasing after it, but it keeps bopping you in the nose, and we're always challenged. The two things that are always a for sure thing is we all despise rejection and the feeling of rejection, and we all are looking for acceptance. Because they're kind of just opposites. One we despise and the other we embrace and we're looking for. But how many of us here, no show of hands, don't have to be a show of hands, have ever been in a situation where you feel like, or you've been placed in that position where you feel like you're not good enough? There probably isn't anyone here that has not dealt with that and faced that kind of rejection. Maybe it's from a job. Maybe it's from a spouse. Maybe it's from your children. Maybe it's from just other relationships in a total way that, kind of just gobble up your life. In some form or fashion, we all hit that wall somewhere. Maybe we didn't achieve what those around us or our families or our parents or whatever wanted us to achieve in life. They always talked about this and talked about that, and you always felt like a failure because you didn't achieve those things. Rejection comes on many levels. Rejection isn't just something that we experience, but it's something that comes in at a young age and begins to change, manipulate, and to shape our world and how we see it and how we see us in the midst of it. It's almost like having a weight tied around your neck and it just pulls you down. And sometimes you just feel like you can't get over the top of it. You see, but what we do, here's a problem what so many of us do. The Bible tells us that we're supposed to be fruit inspectors. We're known by our fruit, which means by what we produce. Okay? So along that lines of thinking about fruit, think of a tree. Think of an apple tree or some small tree we could have right here. When there's rotten fruit on the tree, excuse me, what do we want to do? You want to pick the rotten fruit and get rid of it, don't you? But what happens? The fruit grows back on the tree, doesn't it? It'll still grow rotten again, won't it? And rejection is the same way. We want to deal with the outlying surface problems of rejection: anger, bitterness, jealousy, alcoholism, drug abuse. See, all of those things are byproducts of what? Of the root. See, what we don't want to deal with in life is the root of the problems. That's what destroys us. But just like our fictitious tree, that tree is going to reproduce that fruit. You will continually reproduce that negative fruit in your life when you never deal with the root of the problem, which is our whole overlying part with rejection here. And so many times we don't deal with it. We try to fix the anger. We try to fix the anxiety. We try to fix the fear. But then how many times do you know you're right back in the same situation? You're right back doing the same things. Because all you did was pluck the fruit from the tree. You didn't get to the root. Jesus came to deal with those roots in our lives at the deepest levels. He came to dig up that root of rejection in your life for you and for me. Just because I stand in a pulpit doesn't mean that I don't deal with those same issues. This is a human condition. And we all deal with it. There's plenty of people that the root of their stuff may have came from when they were a little bitty kid. And isn't even anything that's going on now, but it was rooted in them when they were a child. I'll give you an example. What about a mother who doesn't want their child? Maybe they don't go through an abortion, but they're just constantly negative, even while they're carrying the child. They don't want the child. I wish I never had him. I wish I'd have never got pregnant. See, this is where the rubber meets the road, because this is where the root of things start. Because all the while, whether you realize it or not, as that child is developing in the womb, they're beginning to be conditioned for that within them, within their spirit. They come out not realizing it, not understanding all of this, and not even the mother may not even realize it. But they come out of the womb already with a spirit of rejection on them. Because what happens is that then that transfers from that, unfortunately, so many times into the life of that child as they grow. That feeling of rejection, that feeling of not being wanted. I promise you, if you went through our judicial system and you went through the lives of those that are incarcerated, you would find in the path of their lives so many places, especially early on in their lives, where they were rejected or felt rejected, whether they realized it or not. A father that's never around. The majority, if you look at incarcerations, the majority of them had no presence of a father, statistically speaking. They grow up with that feeling of being rejected by their dads. They and you and I have also found that place in our lives where we just don't feel like we're enough. Many times, we're in that lull in life, trying to figure out who we are, trying to figure out, how come nobody loves me? You see, because the root of rejection really is wrapped around and centered around not feeling loved. Because everybody is born with a hunger, whether they realize it or not. They hunger for love. That's the side of acceptance. And many will even come to a place in their own lives where they feel rejected by God. Like He doesn't love them. How many times have you heard the old thing, oh, well, if I went to church there, whatever, man, the roof would come falling in. Because they already see themselves as rejected by God. But that's far from the truth. You see, rejection is a stronghold in our lives. It's a spiritual battle, actually. It's a spiritual battle that we're all dealing with, and what does it rob you of? It robs you of your joy. It robs you of your peace, and it robs you of your purpose. As you try to figure out this crazy thing called life. Unfortunately, we see that from, as I kind of mentioned before, from the young ages of these children. Parents, I can't tell you enough. Love, 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 love your babies. Now, does that mean it's a safeguard that they're never going to go through things, they're never going to be a certain way, they're never going to get influenced by the world and just be, little boogers, running around? No, it's going to happen. But I'm telling you, when you anchor them in it, there may be a day, and it may be a day way down the road, but that'll come back. But that's hard while you're waiting. Doesn't feel good. Because why? Then you too, as a parent, now you feel rejected as well. So we all deal with that at some level. Maybe in a household, maybe it's you have this one parent, or we've already talked about maybe a father that isn't around. Or what about when for a child, I'll use this. I know Akeem and Amber have to be very careful with their kids because DJ, he's autistic. You all know that. But he takes a lot more attention just because of his deficiencies that he has. So they're very mindful of that. And they really work hard at trying to do other things to make sure that Baji and Mercy don't feel like they're not important. They'll do extra things to go over the top. What is it? That's this whole thing so that they're not developing a spirit of rejection in the older ones. Because with DJ, there's no choice. They have to be extremely attentive of him and what he does and how he's acting and all these things. But for a child doesn't understand that. A child in a family with multiple children, typically you will find one of them feels like this one or that one or that one is favored. Didn't we see in the Bible? Joseph was favored by his father, right? So this isn't something that's new. But what it does is it creates a place of feeling of rejection in their lives from a young age. So what does rejection look like in your life and in my life? How does it manifest itself? Not the root, but how does it manifest itself within us? We know rejection is the root that we have to let Christ dig out. But it manifests itself with anxiety and fear. I would say, I have no idea the number, I didn't think to look it up, but people prescribed on anxiety medicines nowadays is through the roof. And many times, not all times, but many times, I mean, there can be chemical imbalances and different things that cause different things. I get that. But there are a lot of times where things are rooted deep in rejection as a child or as an adult, as an individual that has grown up feeling those ways. And then what does that then build? Anger. You see, first, we're dealing with the anxiety and fear because you feel unworthy. You feel not loved. Then the anger comes, and then what do? We begin to lash out. Why? Because you've been hurt. You see, hurt people hurt people. We all do it. And so then that happens. Then comes along this nasty little thing called self-pity. We dwell on our failures. We dwell on our struggles. And next thing you know, we're the victim in everything. It's everybody else's fault. Because then that just feeds the I'm not good enough. I'm not worthy enough. And then that feeds the anger. And then the inadequacy of who we are. And not ever feeling like we'll measure up. I'll never be a good enough mom. I'll never be a good enough father. I'll never be a good enough provider. I'll never be. And each of us deal with that in our lives at some level. You see, because it always whispers lies. You see, that's the thing about spiritual things. They come in cloaked and disguised as other things. They come in as whispers in your life. Maybe some of these will sound familiar. Darren, you'll never be good enough. Oh, yeah, I mean, you get up and you preach a little bit, but you'll never be good enough to be a big preacher. Simple as that. And it just eats at you. And then you get to that person that's trying to find Jesus, and they've got all this baggage. They have all these things in their lives. And the next thing you hear out of their mouths, or what you hear whispered into their ears and typically comes out of their mouths, you can never be good enough for God to love you. Look at your past. Look what you've done. Look what you've said. I mean, don't you remember that was you 2 months ago, laying in a ditch or behind a garbage pail, out back of a building somewhere with a needle hanging out of your arm. How could God use or love you? The whisperers. That's what happened. That's what happens. Then what's the ultimate one? See, I told you. Nobody cares about you. I mean, look, you've already had 2 husbands run off on you. You've already had, your wife, she cares more about all her girlfriends than she does about you. Oh, yeah, I know you've put in for a job, an elevation in your job 5 times and you're always passed over. Was anybody there for you when you was laying in that ditch with the needle hanging out of your arm? No, why? Not even your family? No, why? Because nobody cares about you. The rejection just continually builds. And I promise you, if rejection is your root, okay, your fruit will always be brokenness. If rejection continues to be your root, the fruit it produces will always be brokenness and it will always come through pain. But if God's truth becomes your root, your life will produce peace and you will understand your purpose. That's what we're trying to achieve. In Romans 11:16, he tells us, he says, if the dough offered as first fruits is holy, so is the whole lump. Now here's what I want you to get. This is the B side of it. And if the root is holy, so are the branches. He's saying that if you focus on Christ, you see, we're worried about what everybody else thinks. The one we have to worry about what they think is God. And his word tells us what he thinks, and his word tells us who we are, not the world. But we're worried about the world. But he's saying here, if the root is holy, so are the branches. It doesn't mean, don't get tripped up on the word holy there. It doesn't mean that if your root is perfect. That isn't what he's telling you. It's holy. Being holy is being in right standing with God. And he's saying if you're in right standing with God, and you're allowing him to feed your life, if you're allowing him to dig out that root of rejection, he's saying then your branches, what's produced, we talked about a tree earlier, what's produced in the branches? Fruit. So he's saying that the branches are going to produce good, righteous fruit. It isn't going to produce the anger. It isn't going to produce the hate. It isn't going to produce the venom. You see, that's when our eyes are off Jesus and our eyes are on the world. And we're trying to handle rejection through all those little things that just make you mad, that make you not feel good enough. And sometimes we even carry this, even some of the things I'm even saying now, you never recognized as rejection in your life. But it always shows up in feelings of unworthiness. It always shows up when we get in places of isolation. And it always shows up because it becomes difficult to give or receive love. If you've ever seen anybody that really has huge rejection issues, you see that they're very void of the ability to give love and ability to receive love. Look at 1 John 4:19 through 21. Listen to this. We love each other because he loved us first. We're talking about Christ here, right? If someone says, I love God, but hates a fellow believer, that person is a liar. For if we don't love people we can see, how can we love God who we cannot see? And he has given us this command. Remember, this isn't a, hey, Darren, if you feel like it today, maybe just love somebody, would you? No, he says he gives us this command. Those who love God must, that's a big word. Command's a big word and must is a big word. God must also, or those who love God must also love their fellow believers. Now it done went to meddling, didn't I? Yep, done went to meddling. You're like, all right, Pastor Darren, hey, you're done. But that's the word of God, folks. It isn't easy. God never said or set out a misconception that following his word was going to be simple. Things that are simple you don't get because it's too easy to just do your own thing. It's just like building a house. Having someone else build your house is different than you going out from your own blood, sweat, and tears and building your own house if you have skill sets, which I don't. But there is more taken into it when you're a part of that. And that's what the Word of God calls us to. Because what he is saying here in his word, he's telling you that you can't love. You cannot love without first being loved. You see, when you're walking around feeling like you're not loved, it's hard to give love. Because you're already at a point in your life where you feel discarded. You're disgraced. You're shut down. Nobody cares. They don't love me. Well, I've been over backwards. I've done everything from them. I've done this. And how many of you know most times this stuff comes from family? Yeah, it does. Because what can we do with a friend or a so-called friend? We write them off and we walk away. Yeah, that family member shows right back up at Thanksgiving, though, don't they? And you just feel it. Because you feel like you've done everything. But you didn't feel the love in return. So what then happens? I isolate and I push away. All that is a defense mechanism. That isn't truly what you feel. What it is, it's because your heart's broken. And that's the only way you know how to deal with it. And all of us find ourselves in these places. And the problem is what happens, especially when we do these things at a young age, with our kids especially, is this becomes a hook for generations and generations and generations. It passes down. It's just like I say, the mother that has an unwanted child, they're speaking it into their womb with these children. And then they grow up and, well, they really didn't want them, and that feeling never changes. They don't get the mother instinct or whatever it may be, and they don't want them and they don't care about them. And then guess what? They reproduce it in that child. They reproduce it in them. We have reactions in our minds and who we are in our bodies that when we face rejection, that paths that we go down that are very unhealthy. The first, I'm going to give you three of them. The first one, what happens is we sink under the weight of rejection. It leads us down a road and down a spiritual path that's full of loneliness. It's full of misery, the self-pity, the victimization of who we are, depressed, feeling despair. Then it moves to feelings of death. I don't care if I live. And then it gravitates, even for some, unfortunately, to a place of suicidal thoughts. That's what it does to you. That's what that feeling of rejection does. These are ways, unhealthy ways, that we react to rejection over a period of time. We sink under the weight. Then what happens? We are some of the greatest masons this world has ever seen because we begin to build walls. We build walls around ourselves, and the wall just gets, we lay more bricks and more bricks and more bricks and more bricks, and we build this huge wall, and it's just that wall of safety so no one can get to us because we're trying to live this phony facade and we're trying to mask our pain. And that's what we do. And the people that typically, when you see this happen, here's what you'll see. They'll try in front of everybody, they'll try to make themselves look happy. Oh, everything's great. My word, I love it in church. I just love church because so many times, they're like, because everybody puts their life, which is ridiculous. Everybody puts their life on Facebook and Instagram and all that stuff. So you can see how you're living in the world and then come to church. Oh, everything's great, Pastor. I've been in my Bible all week, been doing this all week. Everything's just going great. We're chipper over here in the Burton household. But all week long, all I've seen is venom and issues and problems and things going on in your Facebook stuff. Because you're running a phony facade, trying to build walls to mask your pain and appear happy. And many times those individuals, they're just all bubbly and they got to be the center of attention and everything going on because I don't want anyone to see my pain. I want to look like I've got everything together. And why is that? Because inside, you've already made the decision, women especially, you've already made the decision, there isn't anyone that's going to hurt me like that again. Then many times you become defiant, especially if it's a broken relationship, a broken marriage. Then you carry that into the next relationship. By golly, nobody's doing that to me. I took that from them, and I'm not taking it again. I'm not listening to that. I'm not doing that. I'm doing my own thing. I don't have to listen to what you say. I don't have to do anything that you want me to do. I'm going to do my own thing. Best 4th of July fireworks you ever saw. Because it's destructive. But the root is all centered around being rejected. I poured all my love. I poured everything into this individual. I poured everything into this, and all I did was got disdain. All I did was got rejection and everything in my life, and it's just crippled me. So now nobody is getting in. Making my wall. Can't get in, can't get in, can't get in. That's how you react. I know better. I've been there, done that. Because it's a defense mechanism. Then what happens? Then we get to the point where we lash out. I know you're all great Christians. You never lash out. I'm talking to everybody online, not none of you guys. You know that. But we lash out. We allow bitterness then to take hold. The last sermon that I'm going to do in this 3-week series is I'm going to break down bitterness. Because the Bible calls bitterness a root. So we're going to deal with that root. But we allow bitterness, we allow this resentment, and you allow the hatred to fester. And more times than not, that condition and those things affect you more than the person that has wronged you. You allow it to eat at you and destroy you, and you allow that bitter root that we'll talk about in a couple weeks. And then what happens is we stand up, we begin to lash out. Because why? Now you find yourself into another place that God says is a big no-no. You find yourself in a state of rebellion. Listen to 1 Samuel 15:23. Rebellion is as sinful as witchcraft, and stubbornness as bad as worshiping idols. So because you have rejected the command of the Lord, he has rejected you as king. This was Samuel talking to Saul. Saul was commanded to go and wipe out the Amalekites. He lets, I think it was Agag, he lets him live, and they take all the best of the animals and they take it in, and he wasn't commanded to do that. And so Samuel's calling out, you have a spirit of rebellion, this spirit of stubbornness as well. And as he says, it's just like worshiping idols. Or as he says with rebellion, it's just as bad as witchcraft. See, most of us don't look at it that way because all we can think about it is from our human terms. But God said this is a much bigger issue. And that is what this causes us to do. Just by this scripture alone, it shows you that through the eyes of God, how serious this is. When we finally get to this point, first we sink under the weight, then we build our walls, and then we begin to lash out. We throw our verbal grenades, we become distant, we stop loving, because in our minds, no one loves us. And then it continues to destroy. Do you realize in all of these things, in everything I've shown you so far in this, none of these reactions brings healing to your life? None of them. Why? Because healing only comes at the foot of the cross with Jesus in your life and dealing with the brokenness in your life, tearing down the stronghold of rejection in your life, allowing you to overcome that and to be able to move forward in life and an understanding that I'm not serving the world, I'm serving the Father. Folks, it isn't easy because when people hurt us, it really, truly hurts. But the big thing from this whole series isn't that I want to tell you, which I'll get into towards the end of it, giving you some points of things, how to deal with some things. But the main thing that I want you to do, there's a saying that I always say in ministry, if you expose it, you can defeat it. It's when we keep these things hidden. So what I want to do is give you the tools so when these things are rearing up in your life, you stop. And you go, why am I feeling this way? Why am I reacting this way? And the bottom line to it is, it's because I feel rejection and I feel rejected in my spirit. When you go to that boss and you say, hey, I think we ought to do this, or this would be a great idea, and I think we just, and then they don't use your idea. Then you stove up and you're mad because they didn't use your idea. Why? Because you feel like you were rejected. Folks, it's that simple. But we don't recognize it in our everyday lives. And so through the course of the series, I want you to begin to understand. I want you to recognize those times of feeling rejected in your life and how you are about to handle it. Many times, how we handle our issues and our problems in life are much, much more linked to the outcome than what originally happened. It's how you react to it. It's how you go about dealing with it. That is when we get ourselves into trouble. And that isn't easy. It's just like many of you right now think, oh, well, Pastor ain't talking to me. I don't do anything like that. That ain't anything I got to worry about. I got this together, that together, and this and that. As soon as you're like that, you better stop and start analyzing your life. Because there isn't anyone sitting here, anyone watching this, that doesn't have these issues in life. Next week, when we bounce into this next segment, we're going to start off trying to replace the lies of the enemy with the truth of God. You see, I'll deal with this later, but rejection actually can be a positive. You just don't recognize it yet. But there can be power in that, and there can be reasons for it when we're dealing on a God level. Okay? I mean, think about it. Jesus was rejected more than any of you ever thought about being rejected. The Bible tells us Jesus was rejected by the people. I mean, he's rejected by when they were asking the Jewish nation, hey, who do you want? Do you want this known killer and this robber and this all this and Barabbas, or he wants to give you Jesus? We want Barabbas. Rejection. How about being nailed to a cross? Being nailed to a cross. And the last words you say are, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. My God, why have you forsaken me? Jesus felt rejection. Jesus knows your pain. Jesus knows your rejection. You get to live a life because of what he was rejected, how Jesus was rejected. You get to live a life with the assurance that God will never reject you. Jesus didn't get that. He had to feel the full brunt of being rejected by the Father, something that a believer will never have to feel. So all of us, all the way down to Jesus, have had to deal with rejection. But just like Jesus, we too can overcome those feelings. Won't be easy. It's going to take some soul searching and some digging in on your part. Remember, God isn't your sugar daddy just to make everything perfect in your life and give you everything you want and never have to go through anything. It's not the way this plan works.